The Code of Hammurabi stands as one of the most remarkable achievements in the history of civilization. Dating back to around 1754 BCE, this ancient artifact from Babylon, in the heart of Mesopotamia, represents one of the earliest and most comprehensive written legal codes in human history. It was crafted under the reign of King Hammurabi, the sixth king of the first Babylonian dynasty, who ruled from 1792 to 1750 BCE. More than just a list of laws, the Code of Hammurabi was a bold statement of governance, justice, and divine authority. The code is famously inscribed on a stone stele over 7 feet tall, which displays a powerful image of Hammurabi receiving the laws from Shamash, the Babylonian sun god and god of justice. This imagery symbolized that the laws were not only royal decrees, but also divinely sanctioned, giving them immense spiritual and political weight. The code contains 282 distinct laws, meticulously carved in cuneiform script. These laws covered a wide spectrum of life: trade, property rights, family dynamics, labor contracts, civil disputes, and criminal justice. One of the most well-known aspects of the code is the principle of retributive justice, captured in the phrase, "an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." This doctrine was intended to ensure that punishments were proportional to the crimes, a significant advancement over the more arbitrary justice systems of earlier societies. However, Hammurabi's code was not solely harsh or punitive. It also included protections for the weak and vulnerable, including women, children, and slaves, a progressive step for its time. This reflects Hammurabi's vision of a king who is not just a ruler, but a shepherd of his people, tasked with maintaining justice and protecting those in need. The social structure of Babylonian society is clearly reflected in the laws. Different rules and punishments were applied to different classes: free men, commoners, and slaves, illustrating a hierarchical system that, while unequal by modern standards, aimed to create order and predictability within a complex and growing civilization. The historical context of the code is equally significant. Hammurabi ruled during a period of increasing urbanization, political centralization, and imperial expansion. As Babylon grew into a powerful state, it absorbed numerous cities with diverse customs and local laws. The Code of Hammurabi was Hammurabi's solution, a standardized legal system that could unify the empire and assert the king's authority across its vast territories. What's more, the stele was not hidden away in palaces or temples. It was displayed publicly, likely in a central location, so that even the literate members of society could see and understand the laws that governed them. This practice laid a foundational principle in the concept of rule of law, that laws should be known, predictable, and accessible to the public. Discovered in 1901 by French archaeologists in what is now Iran, ancient Susa, the code had been taken there as war booty centuries after Hammurabi's time. Its rediscovery offered historians an extraordinary glimpse into the values, struggles, and organization of ancient Mesopotamian life. Legal scholars were especially fascinated by how the code systematized legal thought, laying down procedures, responsibilities, and rights in a way that profoundly shaped future civilizations. The influence of the Code of Hammurabi is far-reaching. It inspired legal practices in the Assyrian and Persian empires, and echoes of its structure and philosophy can be seen in Roman law, Judeo-Christian traditions, and even elements of modern legal systems today. By emphasizing accountability, proportional justice, and codified law, Hammurabi set a precedent that would echo through millennia. Penal law, Hammurabi's reign marked a golden age for Babylon. He was not only a lawgiver, but also a builder, administrator, and military strategist. He oversaw the construction of roads, temples, and irrigation systems, boosting agriculture, trade, and the economic vitality of the empire. Under his rule, Babylon rose from a city-state to a dominant power in Mesopotamia. His legacy lived on long after his death. Later empires drew upon his legal ideas, and today the Code of Hammurabi remains a symbol of early human efforts to create justice, structure, and order in society. It reminds us that, even in ancient times, leaders grappled with the challenge of balancing power, fairness, and the common good. Content, richness. You've covered historical, legal, religious, artistic, and social aspects of Hammurabi's code very well. The flow from the writing system to the laws, to the physical stele and societal impacts is logical and engaging. Descriptive detail. The vivid description of the stele's size, material, and symbolic carvings really helps visualization. At its core, the Code of Hammurabi is most often recognized for its emphasis on retributive justice, famously encapsulated in the phrase, "an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." This principle suggests that punishments should be directly proportional to the offences committed. Rather than being arbitrary or vindictive, the system sought to ensure that justice was measured, balanced, and equitable. This idea of proportionality was designed to curb excessive punishment and establish a legal framework where wrongdoers faced consequences that reflected the nature and severity of their actions. In doing so, the code promoted stability and predictability, key components of any functional society. But Hammurabi's code went beyond simple retribution. It laid out a comprehensive legal system covering a wide array of everyday matters, including commerce, family relations, labor, contracts, and property rights. By clearly defining laws and consequences, it reinforced accountability and helped maintain social harmony. One of the more advanced features of the code, especially for its time, is the presumption of innocence. Before any judgment could be passed, the code required evidence and witness testimony, implying that the accused had a right to defend themselves. This foundational concept still echoes in modern legal systems today. However, the system wasn't blind to social hierarchy. Justice under Hammurabi was not applied equally to all. Punishments often varied based on a person's social class. Harming a nobleman, for example, carried far steeper consequences than harming a commoner or slave. This reflects the stratified nature of Babylonian society, where status played a key role in legal outcomes. The code also embraced elements of restorative justice. In certain cases, offenders were required to compensate victims for losses incurred, aiming to restore the situation rather than merely punish the wrongdoer. This dual focus on punishment and restitution reveals a more complex understanding of justice, one that seeks not only to penalize, but to repair and restore. Another noteworthy aspect of Hammurabi's code is its protection of the vulnerable, particularly women and children. Specific laws outlined the rights of wives, widows, and daughters in matters of marriage, inheritance, and family disputes. While these protections were still bound by the norms of a patriarchal society, they signaled a broader social responsibility to safeguard those with less power. Overall, the Code of Hammurabi reflects a legal philosophy rooted in order, balance, and moral duty. It was a bold attempt to govern a complex society through clear principles, merging retribution with fairness, hierarchy with responsibility, and punishment with compensation. The principle of an eye for an eye has become synonymous with ancient justice systems, especially through the influence of the Code of Hammurabi. Dating back to around 1754 BCE, this idea was central to how justice was conceived in Babylon. It dictated that the punishment should mirror the crime. If one caused physical harm to another, they would suffer a similar injury in return. This concept extended beyond violence. In matters of property theft, for instance, a thief who stole livestock might be required to repay multiple times the value of the stolen item, effectively replicating the loss experienced by the victim. Supporters of retributive justice argue that such clarity helps prevent cycles of violence. By explicitly stating the consequences of wrongful acts, it deters individuals from committing crimes. But critics highlight its potential for endless retaliation, especially when applied rigidly without context. In modern times, legal systems have evolved toward more rehabilitative and restorative approaches, focusing on healing victims, reforming offenders, and reintegrating individuals into society. Yet, the echoes of an eye for an eye still influence many legal debates, particularly when discussing fairness, accountability, and the limits of mercy. Surprisingly, the themes of ownership and justice found in Hammurabi's code continue to resonate, now in the domain of outer space. As nations and private enterprises venture into space exploration, new questions arise. Who owns what in space? What legal systems govern resource extraction on asteroids or the Moon? The Outer Space Treaty of 1967 remains the foundational legal framework. It declares that outer space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, belongs to all humankind. It prohibits national sovereignty over any part of space, ensuring that no country can claim territory as it might on Earth. In the heart of ancient Mesopotamia, a complex and highly structured civilization emerged, one that laid the foundation for governance, justice, and societal organization. At the center of this civilization was the Code of Hammurabi, a set of 282 laws carved into a towering basalt stele, dating back to around 1754 BC under the reign of King Hammurabi of Babylon. This ancient legal code stands not only as one of the oldest deciphered writings in human history, but also as a vivid mirror reflecting the social fabric of Mesopotamian society. One of its most striking aspects is how it dealt with theft, prescribing harsh and public punishments, often death or mutilation, to deter such behavior and reinforce order. But beyond simple crime and punishment, the code institutionalized a rigid social hierarchy that determined a person's rights, responsibilities, and even the value of their life. At the top of this hierarchy stood the nobles and priests, elites who wielded both political and religious power. The code protected their interests with uncompromising severity. For example, if a noble was harmed, the punishment meted out to the perpetrator was far more severe than if the same offence was committed against a commoner. Below them were the commoners, farmers, craftsmen, and labourers. They were protected under the law, but not to the same extent. Their offences received strict punishment, but if they were victims, the consequences for the wrongdoer were notably lighter compared to crimes against the elite. At the bottom of the ladder were the slaves, individuals considered property rather than people. The code treated slaves as economic assets. If a slave was injured or even killed, the punishment was often a monetary fine rather than a violent retribution, underscoring how deeply embedded social stratification was in Babylonian law. This structure extended deeply into family life and marriage. The Code of Hammurabi meticulously documented family obligations, marriage contracts, divorce, and inheritance. Marriage was a formal agreement requiring the groom to pay a bride price, ensuring legal recognition of the union. The laws protected property rights within marriage and provided clear guidelines for the division of wealth in cases of divorce. While women in Babylon had more legal protections than in many other ancient societies, they could own property, run businesses, and receive inheritance, their status was still deeply patriarchal. A woman's rights were often tied to her relationship with a man, her father, husband, or son. If a woman committed adultery, the punishments were often far more severe than those for a man, reflecting the dominant male-centered worldview of the time. Nevertheless, women were afforded some legal protection. In divorce, for example, the husband was obligated to return her dowry, providing a degree of financial stability. If widowed or divorced with children, the woman could retain custody, and laws ensured that orphans and children were provided for, demonstrating a surprising early form of child protection and familial duty in law. Slavery, too, was carefully legislated. Slaves could be bought, sold, inherited, or even used to settle debts. Their treatment varied depending on their master and their role in society. While slaves had some limited rights, such as earning wages or eventually buying their freedom, they were primarily viewed as tools of labor in both households and the economy. Through its meticulously carved laws, the Code of Hammurabi sought to maintain order in a rapidly growing and complex society. Yet it did more than enforce justice. It codified inequality, institutionalized patriarchy, and reinforced the prevailing social hierarchy. The law was not blind. It recognized class, gender, and power, and shaped justice accordingly. Even today, the legacy of Hammurabi's code endures, not only as a historical artifact, but as a symbol of humanity's early struggle to define justice, maintain order, and organize society. It reminds us that while civilizations evolve, the tension between power, justice, and equality is a timeless human concern. Slavery was common, and slaves were treated as property used for labor and household duties. Yet, the code offered some legal protection. For example, if a master injured a slave, penalties were applied. Some slaves could even earn their freedom, showing a small path toward autonomy. In commerce, the code regulated prices, loans, and trade. Merchants were expected to be honest, and defective goods had to be refunded. Interest rates were capped, and all major transactions required proper documentation. Religion was deeply tied to law. Hammurabi claimed divine authority from the god Marduk, making law enforcement a sacred duty. Many laws reflected religious values like protecting widows and orphans, those seen as under divine care. Justice was based on the idea of retribution, an eye for an eye. Punishments varied by social class, with nobles, commoners, and slaves treated differently under the law. Finally, the code promoted transparency, as laws were carved into stone for all to see. This idea of public law influenced future legal systems, including Roman and Jewish law, and laid the foundation for modern justice. Despite its significance, Hammurabi's code is not without criticism. One of its most glaring issues lies in its rigid social hierarchy. Laws were not applied equally. Noblemen received lighter punishments than commoners for the same crime. This disparity raises important ethical concerns about the fairness and equality of justice, reflecting a society where social status heavily influenced legal outcomes. Additionally, the code is notorious for its harsh punishments. The principle of lex talionis, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, represented a system focused on retribution over rehabilitation, leaving little room for mercy, reform, or second chances. It promoted physical punishments, including amputations and death, even for what would now be seen as minor infractions. Some laws also lacked clarity or specificity, which may have led to arbitrary interpretations by judges and opened the door to bias or corruption in legal proceedings. Gaps in modern legal principles. When viewed through the lens of modern jurisprudence, the Code of Hammurabi misses several key elements. It lacks provisions for the rights of the accused, legal representation, the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. These omissions illustrate the limitations of the code in addressing modern concepts of justice. Moreover, we must acknowledge that the code is only a fragment of Babylon's full legal and cultural system. Most of our understanding comes from surviving steles, leaving the context of enforcement somewhat unclear. Lastly, the political motives behind the code cannot be ignored. Created during a period of political consolidation, it likely served to reinforce Hammurabi's authority as much as it aimed to maintain social justice. IV, personal injury, and retribution. One of the code's most detailed areas is its treatment of personal injury. It provided structured laws on compensation and punishment, again based on social class. If a free man injured another free man, the penalty would be higher than if the injured party were a slave. This legal bias reflected the social hierarchy of Babylon. The code also addressed negligence. For example, if someone's carelessness caused harm, they were held legally responsible. This was an early attempt to instill a sense of personal accountability. In medical cases, physicians were punished if their treatment led to injury or death. The law demanded skill and care, foreshadowing modern malpractice standards. Importantly, the code recognized intent, distinguishing between accidental and malicious harm, highlighting a nuanced understanding of motivation in justice. Beyond criminal justice, the code set early standards for accountability among public officials. Even today, the principles of transparency, ethical conduct, and oversight in governance echo the spirit of Hammurabi's laws. Modern equivalents include financial disclosure by public officials to prevent conflicts of interest, ethics codes promoting honesty, integrity, and legal compliance, independent oversight bodies like ombudsman offices and ethics commissions to investigate misconduct, training programs that educate officials on ethical behavior and help them navigate moral dilemmas. These frameworks uphold public trust, just as Hammurabi intended, through the visibility and permanence of his laws. The Code of Hammurabi, created around 1754 BC in ancient Babylon, is one of the earliest written legal codes. It contains 282 laws, inscribed on a tall stone stele, symbolizing divine authority, as Hammurabi is depicted receiving the laws from the sun god Shamash. Though not directly focused on environmental law, the code laid foundational principles for land use, property rights, and resource management. Modern parallels include zoning laws, environmental impact assessments, and sustainable development practices, all aimed at balancing growth with ecological preservation. Archaeological discoveries such as clay tablets and administrative documents show how the code was applied in real-life legal cases. These reveal a structured society with defined rights, including some for women, and strict punishments based on the principle of an eye. The code also played a vital role in promoting trade. It established clear rules for commerce, fair pricing, standardized weights and measures, and dispute resolution, which boosted merchant confidence across regions. This legal certainty helped Babylon become a hub of regional trade, strengthening diplomatic and economic ties with neighboring cultures. In short, Hammurabi's code was not just a legal document, it was a tool for governance, social order, environmental balance, and economic expansion. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest deciphered writings of significant length, dates back to around 1754 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia. Carved onto a tall basalt stele, this monumental text offers an extraordinary glimpse into early governance, justice, and society, principles that still echo in modern legal systems. Crafted during the reign of King Hammurabi of Babylon, the code comprises 282 laws, meticulously etched into stone and prominently displayed in public. This was not merely a legal document. It was a symbol of royal authority, divine justice, and social order. At its heart, the Code of Hammurabi emphasized the rule of law, an early acknowledgement that society should be governed by known written rules rather than arbitrary decisions. These laws applied to various aspects of life: trade, family matters, property rights, contracts, labor, and professional conduct. However, justice was not blind. The code explicitly recognized and enforced social hierarchies. Different punishments were assigned depending on a person's status. Free men, slaves, women, and nobles were treated unequally under the law. For example, a noble harming a commoner might face a fine, while a commoner harming a noble could face death. This codified inequality reinforced the Babylonian class structure, but also clarified the expectations and consequences for all members of society. One of the most recognizable features of the code is the concept of lex talionis, or the law of retaliation, famously summarized as an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This principle established the notion that punishment should be proportionate to the crime, discouraging excessive revenge and promoting a system of balanced justice. Though harsh by modern standards, this idea was revolutionary. It sought to prevent personal vengeance from spiraling into cycles of violence, and instead established the state as the arbiter of justice. Remarkably, the code also included provisions aimed at protecting the weak and marginalized, widows, orphans, and the poor. These laws required fair treatment and protection against exploitation, placing a moral responsibility on rulers to care for their most vulnerable citizens. This early form of social justice suggested that governance extended beyond punishment. It also involved compassion and care. The Code of Hammurabi was not just a legal text, it was a religious and political manifesto. Hammurabi claimed that the god Marduk had chosen him to bring order to the land. This divine endorsement elevated the laws beyond human debate. Disobeying the law was tantamount to defying the gods, strengthening the ruler's grip on power. By intertwining law with religion, Hammurabi ensured widespread compliance. Citizens obeyed, not just from fear of punishment, but from spiritual reverence. The decision to inscribe the laws on a public stele was profoundly symbolic. It emphasized transparency and accountability. For the first time in history, a government had made its laws accessible to all literate members of society. This ensured that justice was not secretive or arbitrary, but rooted in a shared public code. The spread and preservation of Hammurabi's code was closely tied to the evolution of education and record-keeping. From Mesopotamian scribes to medieval monks, and eventually through the invention of the printing press, education played a vital role in transmitting legal knowledge. In modern times, the study of codes, both linguistic and legal, has expanded dramatically. From cryptography to computer programming, understanding complex systems of rules has become essential in fields ranging from law to cybersecurity. Today, schools and universities around the world emphasize critical thinking, literacy, and coding, continuing the legacy of intellectual development that began in ancient civilizations like Babylon. Historians and legal scholars view the Code of Hammurabi as a milestone in the history of law. Its detailed structure and categorization paved the way for later legal systems, including Roman law, biblical laws, and modern legal codes. While some critics focus on its inequalities and severity, others highlight its progressive elements, particularly its recognition of the poor, its insistence on written law, and its commitment to structured governance. Modern scholars also analyze the code through various lenses, including feminist theory, comparative law, and cultural anthropology, revealing how laws reflect the values, fears, and aspirations of the societies that create them. The Code of Hammurabi was more than a legal guide. It was a declaration of how a ruler should govern, how justice should be served, and how society should be structured. It embodied the belief that order must be established, power must be balanced, and justice must be visible. Though carved in stone nearly 4,000 years ago, its lessons still resonate. In a world still grappling with fairness, accountability, and social justice, the Code of Hammurabi reminds us that the quest for just governance is an ancient one, and one that continues to shape our civilization. However, there's ambiguity. While countries cannot own space, private companies argue that the treaty doesn't explicitly prevent them from owning resources they extract. For example, if a company mines minerals from an asteroid, it may claim ownership of the mined material, even if it cannot claim the asteroid itself. Nations like Luxembourg have already passed laws allowing companies to do just that. Its space agency actively encourages private sector investment in space mining, laying the groundwork for a new extraterrestrial economy. This raises further questions about regulation, sustainability, and fairness. As we move beyond Earth, how do we prevent the mistakes made in terrestrial colonization and resource exploitation? Much like Hammurabi's effort to bring structure and accountability to his own civilization, the future of space law will require collaboration, clarity, and a shared moral vision. The Code of Hammurabi dealt with theft in a particularly strict manner, emphasizing property rights and deterrence. Stealing from sacred institutions like temples or palaces often resulted in death penalties. Such harsh punishments reflect the cultural and religious importance of these places and the desire to maintain social order through fear of consequences. In cases involving the theft of livestock or other personal property, the punishments typically involved multiple repayments. For example, stealing a sheep could require the thief to repay fourfold. This was not just punitive, it was compensatory, ensuring the victim was repaid with interest. If a thief couldn't repay, they could be enslaved by the victim until the debt was fulfilled. While this reflects the harsh realities of ancient societies, it also shows a commitment to restitution and balance, rather than indefinite imprisonment or unchecked punishment. Each case of theft was evaluated based on context and severity, and the prescribed punishments aimed to uphold economic stability and social ethics. The goal was not only to penalize, but to preserve the integrity of the community.